So all four of these topics today are just my favorite things to do with the API, but neither of them are very traditional things to do with the API, and the classify part is no exception. As I mentioned earlier, we took a different approach when it comes to classifications and dimensions. We are not using a journal level 1 because it just doesn't work with other content types. And we wanted a uniform way of analyzing the data and applying the classifications the same way throughout, regardless of the type of data that we have. So the same classifications should work with grants, with clinical trials, with policy documents, and so forth. And we also wanted to do it in a way that it wouldn't involve an army of people. So what we did instead is we took pre-existing classification systems. The FOR is one of them, the fields of research. It is primarily used in Australia and New Zealand to classify their grants, actually. But there are other classification systems in dimensions as well, like the units of assessment or the Sustainable Development Goals, the RCDC, and a few other ones. I think there are 10 in total, and 4 of which have been added in the last 2 years and a bit. So we started with an existing classification system for 2 reasons. One, because we needed the pre-classified data in order to learn the patterns. So what happens is that a group of experts are assigning labels on publications or grants, it doesn't really matter. And then our system detects patterns. So why has a publication or a grant has been classified as engineering and another one has been classified as medicine or as philosophy. And once our system learns those patterns, it is able to apply them to any documents out there, and quite fast. And what we did on top of this is to match if our algorithms are as good as the people, and they are. Surprising, so the match is 90% of what people would have classified them anyway. And I've started in the library as in the classifications department, so where I would assign the Dewey classifications to all of the publications. So it is very interesting to see how that can be translated into a machine learning algorithm. The other reason is that we wanted this active learning algorithm to be able to import as many classification systems as needed. As I mentioned, in the last 2.5 years since Dimensions was launched, we also added at least 4 more classification systems. I think they were the 2 cancer types, Sustainable Development Goals 1, and the units of assessment. And they were all used largely using the same technology. And also, yeah, this is a list of all of them. And of course, we didn't just want to keep the technology for ourselves. And what we did is that you would be able to classify your own holdings using the classification systems that exist in Dimensions as well. So if you're interested in classifying publications that don't even exist in Dimensions through the Sustainable Development Goals lens or the units of assessment lens, then you would just run those publications through Dimensions, and they would be, you would have some classifications at the other end. And these are some examples because it can be done in 2 different ways. The first is the actual classify function. So you would just put in the title, the abstract, and the system that you would want it classified in. And then you would just get the classification system. And this is actually used with the Google Sheets integration. You would just put the DOI or any other identifier for that publication. And just get the category that you're interested in. And then you could feed that data back into your own system or use it for an analysis if that is what you need. And the reason that I've included this today is that I would really want to know how do you see classifications? Because each institution is different and they have different ways of categorizing everything. And it's always very interesting to see how they're going about the existing classification systems that they use in their existing systems, but also how they build on top of that. So I guess this particular bit is me learning from you how you are doing your own classifications, how you're going about it, and what do you think of an automated way of doing it? What are your worries about it? And I will be monitoring the chat for that. Let's see. I guess there are systemic limitations. For example, does Elsevier contribute data? Yes, they do. And they are very important partners of ours. And of course, we get their citation data as well. And FundRef, as everyone, I guess, knows, it was primarily built by Elsevier and put out into the world for everyone to use. And Dimensions is using the FundRef IDs. So yeah, of course, Elsevier, Springer Nature, Wiley, they all contribute with data. And the systemic limitations are, of course, how you get the data out. And there are limitations to that, all of which can sort of be bypassed. And there's another limitation when it comes to the accuracy of data that we have available. So when there is no way of bringing clear metadata, there is no way from the publishers themselves, regardless of their name or their size, then there's no way for us to invent it. So if a journal does not have a title, it doesn't have an abstract within the metadata, we cannot put it there for them. If it doesn't exist somewhere that we can get it. Also, most of the publications in Dimensions have a DOI. And if they don't have a DOI, the chances of it having it indexed in Dimensions and then linked to everything else are very slim. The same would be for grants. So if we have the grants data, but the funder chooses not to disclose the awarded amounts, we cannot just add them. So there will be those kinds of limitations. And in that perspective, what I would like is just to have a more transparent global way of pulling in data. Whether Dimensions is a beneficiary of that, that would be great, of course, but then everyone else gets access to that kind of transparent data as well. So all of the funders to have all of the information that is public information anyway, in a way that is easy to get. All of the publications to have clear, crisp metadata, which I guess every one of you is dreaming of as well. When it comes to those kinds of limitations, that is really what I would wish for. Eric, I'm having a terrible network. Yes, the conference will be recorded and the slides would be shared as well, so no need to worry. From which API this functionality is available? It is all in the same API. Dimensions doesn't have multiple APIs. It is just one API. It has, well, actually, there are 3 different ones, but they're for different uses. So it is the same data. But the analytics API, for example, would return facets, whereas the runtime API wouldn't, because it doesn't really make sense. When you build dashboards, you can just write in the code to be, for those facets to be calculated, and it also would be faster. And there's also a CRIS API that is, again, the same data, so really the same API, sort of. But it is updated when it comes to functionality about once a year. So it is very, very stable and doesn't change a lot, if that makes sense. do you supply classifier metrics? Well, the metrics are based on these categorizations, particularly the FOR and the RCDC. So the RCDC, oh, I never can remember what RCDC stands for. It is a medical classification used by the NIH in the US, which I guess stands for something. Oh, what am I doing? Just a minute. Let's just rely on what is actually written rather than my own memory, which serves me less and less. Research condition, come on, load. And disease categorization. So these two are the primary sources for us calculating metrics. The fields of research is used to calculate the FCR, so the field citation impact, which is the normalized metric at field level. And I guess the main difference is that the categorization itself is applied at article level. So the metric, the resulting metric is a pure article level metric. And the RCDC is used for, well, actually, it's not used yet. I've used it separately to try and make sense of what is going on with the COVID-19 research, because as you know, there are more than 50,000 publications out there and growing. That is more than what some universities publish in a few years' time. So by using this kind of medical focused categorization and then apply a normalization at week level, you can get a pretty good grasp of which institutions are focusing on which type of research. So some of them focus on prevention, some other one focus on vaccines, and so on. But the primary metrics are based on the fields of research. Let's see. Radim, does that answer your question? Not entirely sure what you mean by accuracy and precision. For metrics or for the oh, right, yeah, I got it. Took me a second. So for the classifiers, when we do assign the classification, if we assign a metric to that, there is a confidence level, but it is internal and it's not surfaced in the API. But there is one assigned, and we use it to fine tune the classifications themselves. And there are two different ways of going about it. One is the automated one, just using the system to assign confidence levels to the classifications. And the other one is just using external professionals to classify the same group of data, and then using our own system to classify the same batch of data and then compare it. And there you would get some percentage differences. But what we got every time we did that is that the systems mimics just about 90-something%. I think it was 96, between 90 and 96% in what the people would do, which is great. I am still wondering whether this is to keep our things safe in a bank locker, like, or help us do the research. That is a very interesting thought process. But I don't think it's to keep things safe. If anything, it would be to keep things open and transparent. And that would indeed help you do your research better, because if everything is open and you know where the data is coming from, and also the gaps in the data that are out there, then you would know how to focus your research. You would be able to extract trends from funding, because the funding that is awarded today would not yield any publications in at least 1-2 years, depending on what they're focusing on. And then it takes some time for those publications to get citations. So if you try to derive trends from citations, you are missing out on quite a lot of what is going on. Does the API return the probability of classification? No. We have that for internal purposes, but it does not return it. There are classifications which are literally warranted. Example, PubMed, LOC. These classifications are of a different status from ad hoc ones. That is a very good point. And the mesh terms of the thesaurus used by PubMed is included in the mention, so you can search by a PubMed term. And I think there are some, at least discussions internally about ways to expand the way the PubMed mesh terms are assigned. But those are really just discussions. And I'm not sure anything will come of it. There are also some limitations to that, because PubMed is particularly, it is a medical classification. Well, it is a medical thesaurus. And we took a different route for that. And I'll explain that in a minute, because that's actually my next part of the presentation. As for the ad hoc ones, they have the value in themselves. So when it comes to the units of assessment, that's what the UK does their assessment on. When it comes to the FORs, that's what the Australia and New Zealand assigns their grants on. So of course, they have values as well, just different types of ones. Radim, yeah, I eventually got it that you did not mean the bibliometric metrics, and I do hope that I've answered your question correctly eventually, but let me know if there aren't. So the way we evaluate the performance of the classifications is primarily to use actual experts that have classified it before and compare what our system does versus what actual humans do. And try to improve based on that. But we wouldn't want our system to outperform the humans at this point. We want the system to mimic humans to the best of the system's abilities. And that is the main focus here. Although that has its own caveats, again, as someone that has worked in the categorizations department, assigning labels to publications, what I would assign to a publication would be completely different to what my colleague right next to me would do. So we would have, at least for the main publication, some limits, or we would discuss it for the most complicated ones. So of course there are limitations, but we would still want our systems to mimic what the humans do. Does that help? Oh, that is a very good question, Justine. We chose it because they had huge pre-classified amounts of data that we could use for a training set. That was the main reasoning. And also because it is interdisciplinary, so everything from music to medicine is there. And that's why we chose them. They are broad, and they had large batches of pre-classified data that we could use for the training set. Thank you. See more questions? Oh. There's another question in the Q&A box. Hello, I see a lot of reference has been made to interpretation, but I have been wondering how easy it is to navigate dimensions. And in terms of bandwidth consumption, how light is the database? When it comes to bandwidth, I really don't know what to say. I would have to ask, really, because dimensions is a huge database. And one query can have, can return 2 gigabytes of data, or it can return 300 or more. It all depends on the type of query and the type of querying that you're doing. So if you want something that is very broad, like search publications, return publications, limit 1,000, then that is a lot. Primarily if you include all the possible facets as well. But if you just want search publications and return authors, first name, last name, and current affiliation, limit 5, then that would be very little. So it does depend on your querying. And as it comes to easy, what I've mentioned before, so the extraction examples that I've just mentioned now, these are actually how a query in the DSL would look like. So as someone who is using it every day, for me, it has become very easy. But I'm also someone who does not have a technical background. So I'm assuming that if it is easy for me, it will be very, very easy for everyone else. I hope that makes sense. And I see there are no more questions. Just minimize the chat box and move back into extracting concepts. Extracting concepts. You can think of concepts as pre-weighted keywords that are generated automatically. And they can be extracted from any piece of text, regardless if it has been indexed in dimensions or not. So you can just put it any piece of text and it would return all of the concepts extracted, and it will assign a score to each of them. So you can return both the concepts and the score this time. And this would also make your analysis a bit easier, because you can only focus on the concepts, that have a score above 0.5. The scores are assigned between 0 and 1. So you would want only the highest relevant ones, or you can have a very low threshold for your score, and see everything that is going on. When it comes to concepts, we took a slightly different route in how we've put it together. We don't use a preset thesaurus, but we also didn't let our algorithms just run wild and extract words, because what would that do is extract very, very funny concepts. What we did instead is we pre-weighted all of the words in English that exist in dimensions, and assigned them a score relative to the FOR that they are part of. So we would know that library would be 100% library and information science, but library can also be a little bit computer science, right? Because you can have a library of code. So with all of the words pre-classified, pre-weighted, then we are able to assign and extract these concepts from literally any piece of text out there. And the advantage to that is that you can extract concepts of words that don't yet exist. So they're not part of any controlled vocabulary, but you would still see them in your extraction. And again, these can be fed back. You don't really need to use our environment to analyze them. You can just extract them and put them back into your own system, into your own dashboard. The example here is for a CRIS system, but it can be really any dashboard out there. And it can be done in two different ways. So you can extract the concepts from a text. You can use it to extract concepts from a yet unpublished article and see what is going on there. Or you can use it as part of your discovery process if it's something very complicated. And that is actually something I've done when I had to find out similar publication. Well, I had to find publications that were specifically dealing with genetically modified plants. What was it? Genetically modified plants that extract carbon and store them into their roots. And I found out that that is actually quite difficult to find. And that is one way I went about it, just extracting concepts and creating my pool of concepts to just search for publications. So it can work like that. And of course you can just extract them and have them instead of keywords. So if you don't know what kind of keywords you want to assign to your publications that you will be sending to publish to a journal out there, you can just extract concepts and see what the system suggests. Or you can use any of the identifiers, similarly to how it was with the classifications. And all the time, this time, you can also return the concept scores for each of the concepts assigned. And these are some analyses ideas. So this is looking at co-occurrence of some concepts these are just randomly extracted, and you would see how they appear together. And for neither of the examples actually here today, I've used the concept, but I hope they will be useful for you as well, or at least give you some ideas or some feedback as well. So the way to, I guess, interpret this is that a lot of the research that is done on cloud computing, which is what the main concept that I've used to extract the other concepts that are within the same discipline, all the research tends to focus on what is actually going on within cloud computing rather than mentioning the suppliers. And this was quite interesting for me to see also how important security was in the context. And some other analysis idea for a subset of data in one of the FORs, so the fields of research, in this case genetics, which are the trending, the concepts that have first appeared in 2019. So as you will see here, there are words that exist. They weren't just invented in 2019, but it was the first time that they appeared in the concept of genetics. Sorry, which was that part was quite interesting to see. And with that, we're moving back to my favorite part, which is questions. Help for finding keywords sounds interesting. Thank you. I was hoping you would say that. So how would you think of concepts? Would you rely on a system to extract them? Would you use them? What are different ways of using them that you can think of? Questions? Do you see this as something that would be useful, particularly in the arts and humanities side of the world, where I guess everyone can find examples in genetics, but when it comes to looking at arts and humanities, it becomes slightly more difficult. Particularly, I could think of philosophy, where you can just look at theoretical ways of understanding the universe, or any other things. And then the concepts would probably, the automated concepts would probably fall into more physics and astrophysics, given the example, rather than philosophy. But it would be very interesting to hear your thought process as well. Anyone? I can see that this would be very helpful for CRIS elements to ensure researchers have good keywords assigned to their profiles. I am partly sure that this is already part of the integration with elements, but I will need to double check how that works, because elements has a write API, so it's very easy to just add stuff to it. I think there was a raised hand somewhere. Let me just find it. Can't find it anymore, but Tommaso, if you are unmuted. Tommaso, you are now unmuted. You can just unmute your microphone. Feel free to ask. Oh, okay. And Malen, I hope I pronounced it correctly. You can also, you have full control over your microphone as well. Okay, so as there are no further questions for this particular part, I will just move on to the final part of this presentation, which is extract grants. So you all have, I guess, in various systems that you're using, different ways of capturing the grants that have been awarded to your institution. With each funder assigning a different type of pattern of numbers and identifications for the grants that they award. And that is absolutely fine. But when you're starting to use a system like Dimensions, we would also, well, no, I will just start over. Not necessarily when you start using a system like Dimensions, but generally to have complex analyses based on those numbers, they would need to have just one identifier. So you can look at what are the publications that have resulted from grants in chemistry in the last 5 years for our chemistry department. If you have various different numbers and various different IDs, that analysis will become difficult, not impossible. And I'm sure that most of you already have workflows in place to get that done. But what Dimensions does is use those identifiers that we ourselves use, assign one grant ID, and then feed that back into your system. So then you would be able to use one identifier to query all the data that exists in Dimensions as well. So rather than looking at grant number R01HL and all the other that I've put in here, you would use the one identifier and look at which similar publications have been published that are similar to this grant, actually, or which similar grants have been awarded by other funders out there. What are the trends in the next 5 years? Are we actually getting grants or focusing generally in a way that it is worldwide declining? Or one of my favorite things to do is look at the return on investment on young researchers. So if they get a grant today, how is their career over time developing? And this is something that you would get easier if you would just have one identifier rather than having to account for multiple different identifiers from multiple different funders. And for this particular part, I was hoping that I would have a conversation with you, because I'm really interested in how you're going about these types of analyses when it comes to looking at trends, or when it comes to looking at a researcher career over time. How are you doing it now? Are you, and what are just the clever solutions and ideas that you have put into place to come up with these types of analyses? Because this is the final part, so this is just rounding up, going back into the universe of dimensions with that identifier and being able to query everything. But more than this, I would really want to know what you guys are doing, and not necessarily with the grants part, but also with everything else that I've run through today, whether it comes to disambiguating institutions or authors, or assigning classifications or concepts, or doing these types of more complex analysis when it comes to trends, or finding grants. If grants that you're already interested in have been awarded or not, and how do you fit in all that world of grant applications? And with that, I will start monitoring the chat. I hope I haven't been very boring, since there aren't any questions. Anyone? Thank you, that is very kind of you.
Chris, Dragan Ivanovic is talking. I'm a general chair of the conference. You already mentioned that you already tried actually to encourage people to raise the hand and to say something. So I would like also to join you in that part, and to say it's not the idea just to write your messages in the chat. It should be interactive. So please do not hesitate just to raise your hand and to comment on presentation and to raise some question and so on. And one more suggestion. So if someone only pose the question to all panelists, not to all panelists and attendees, just to know that it's not seen by all attendees. So recently you said just, oh, thank you for good comment, that it's not boring, but just clear. So you should just, relate that, put that in the context. Maybe you should read the chat and then just answer to that, just to be clear situation for all attendees.
Yes, that is a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Once again, please raise your hand and start discussion. It was really interesting presentation, I think, from Chris.
Thank you, Dragan. And last but not least, and I almost forgot, if you would like to test dimensions, the user interface, or you would just like to have more questions and talk separately, feel free to just reach out to me. My email will be in the presentation. And yep. Loe, I can unmute you if that is okay with you. And again, I do apologize if I mispronounce your names. I'm generally terrible at names. I should do better with that.
I don't have an urgent question, but I would like to know how you raise your hand.
Oh, there should be a button somewhere.
Sorry,
Yes.
Chris. Sorry for interruption. So, Lut, you're here also as a speaker. You will be our keynote speaker, of course.
Yeah.
So, meaning you are a panelist in the terminology of Zoom webinar, and you can speak. So you can unmute yourself and just say what you have. So
Okay.
the raising of the hand is an option for attendees who can't unmute themselves if they don't raise the hand. So it's not an option.
Thank you for the explanation.
Okay.
Marie, thank you for the presentation. I'm sorry if I missed this, but is Dimensions more specifically oriented towards the medical field, or does it look like this as this corpus was a first large sample? Well, it only looks like that for two reasons. One, medicine tends to just overshadow everything else when it comes to research. Just the publication, the sheer volume of publications and grants and everything that has to do with the medical field is significantly larger than everything else. The second part of it, which thanks to your question, I am able to bring up because I almost forgot, is that particularly social sciences and arts and humanities publications tend to have very little identifiers and very poor metadata. It is not a rule. Of course, there are journals that do better and some that do not so great. But generally, going back to the wish list, I would really love for arts and humanities and social sciences to use identifiers more broadly and to put more metadata in. And again, not just for the sake of Dimensions, but if you put in correct metadata or comprehensive metadata in Crossref, then everyone else can use it as well. Dimensions would, of course, be one of the beneficiaries, but it wouldn't be the sole one. I hope that makes sense. And we also do tend to have categorizations that are broad and also some that are just medical. But yeah, we don't choose. Justine, do you propose some way or document or a web page that details the origin of the data that feeds Dimensions as a kind of coverage guide? You already answered my question about it, but I'd be interested in that kind of detailed document. Yes, of course. That is actually on our website. If you go to dimensions.ai, let me just, it should be somewhere here in resources. Oops. The API documentation, so everything you need to know about the API, and it should be somewhere. Never remember where it is. I will find it and I will send it to Dragan or just include it in my presentation and add it, because it is somewhere here. I just never remember where. Yeah, I'm sorry. I will find it. So you can use Jayashri. Gosh, I'm really sorry if I mispronounce your name. Are there any charges? There are and there aren't, depending on what you want to use. So for the badges, for example, and I will go into the badge. Oops, I was typing it in a different place. Badges, dimensions. These are free to add to your repository. This is a free API, and it will return citation-based data. So if you go again, if we go to dimensions, there's also a free version of dimensions for the researchers. So again, where you would find the publications and data sets only, and a few less filters. But you can still filter on open access publications, for example, and just read them here. So this view PDF button would also be enabled. And I think there are two classifications, the Sustainable Development Goals and the FORs in the free version. But yeah, this would work in the free version as well. When it comes to the other part that we've discussed, such as extracting concepts or extracting grants or anything that has to do with the analytics API, that would be a paid for service. But that is a completely different conversation. Sergio, just a second. You have now control over your mic, Sergio. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, feel free. Oh, a mistake. No, no worries. All good. Suzanne, just a second. Okay, you have now control over your mic, Suzanne.
Thanks, Christina. I just had a question about the Sustainable Development Goals. So you mentioned that that is sort of part of the free part of dimensions. We're using symplectic elements as our CRIS. Is there some way that we can feed through the sort of Sustainable Development Goals sort of categories that they could then come through into elements?
I am not sure. I would need to ask the symplectic team. Can I know your organization? So
Yeah, University of Sussex.
You don't happen to have dimensions as well, do you?
No, we haven't, no.
Okay, just double checking. I will ask my colleagues and I will get back to you. I think Daryl might have your contacts, or at least contacts from one of your colleagues.
Okay, thanks very much. It's very helpful.
Thank you. There are a few more raised hands. Umar, you can also unmute your microphone. And I think there were some other raised hands. Marcel. Okay, Marcel, you are also unmuted. Or actually, yeah.
Yes, hi, this is Marcel from Mecklenburg from the Netherlands.
Oh,
hi. I wonder about the size of the whole database. Can you say something about it in maybe gigabytes or amount of records or triples? I don't know how you express it, but I would like to get an idea on how big it is.
Well, it is very big in terms of terabytes of data. And there are about 5 billion linkages between all the different content types. So I don't know if that helps, but it is a fairly large database.
Right, okay, thanks.
Oh, I think there was another raised hand somewhere. Oh, Radim, has the program of providing API for researcher has been reviewed yet? My application for Dimensions Access was declined in May, apparently due to COVID-19. Radim, that is, yeah, I think it is still on hold because my colleagues are still processing COVID-19 related applications. And I'm not entirely sure they would look at the backlog. But let me just write your name down. And I will ask my colleagues. And I think I should be able to find your name somewhere within the applications. Okay. Any more questions? If there aren't any more questions, I'm just going to give you back 20 minutes and you will have a longer break. And I guess I will see you throughout all the other presentations as well, because I'm really looking forward to all of them. Feel free to reach out to me if you would like to test dimensions or if you have more questions. If you just like to debate, give feedback, always feel free to reach out.